Good afternoon, Scott Baker. Happy Sunday afternoon. If you can't tell by the way I'm dressed, happy Sunday.
I was really going to try to not make any comment about the way that you're dressed. Now, a good number of folks will listen to this as a podcast, not on the Sunday afternoon live version of Lead Better. We're grateful for the folks that might be watching live on any of the social platforms, but if you're listening, okay. Mikey is wearing a jersey. You know, it's the football thing. I'm wearing a neutral white shirt. I feel like we're doing one of those things that people sometimes have done where they identify themselves at the beginning of a meeting and what they're wearing. Mikey is wearing a football jersey, but I'm just not going to get into which team, and you're just going to have to figure that out, or go to YouTube or to Substack or someplace to check that out later.
We'll figure out some way to weave it in.
Yeah. However, I actually do think that I will weave this conversation back in this episode of Lead Better to football and attire in a way that maybe you're not predicting. The topic, however, which seems unlikely that I would be able to make the tie, never bet against me on that, weave. But here's the thing. It's about relationships. So the title of the field note is "Our Relationship with Others Depends First on Our Relationship with Ourselves." Fairly long title. And we like to get into the whole relationship thing, which can get a little, ooey gooey, I guess, for a leadership audience, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like too much for us. Like, how are we going to pull behaviors out of this kind of topic?
Sure.
But we're, in our leadership development approach, even though behaviors are first, it doesn't mean that we don't deal with people's mindset and psychology quite a bit as well.
Right. Yeah.
So with this idea, there's three things that are called out that you need to pay attention to for yourself: self-trust, self-respect, and self-awareness, as those three. And we've talked a lot about self-awareness being like really important for leaders. Like, their relationships with others without that self-awareness can really be destructive. And we've also talked about how it's difficult to increase people's self-awareness. Like, you might be able to take somebody from a 7 to an 8, but taking someone from a 2 to a 7 seems nearly impossible.
Yeah. I actually was at a dinner last night with a couple of folks, and this came up, and somebody had mentioned the idea of self-awareness. And I said, that's actually a very difficult thing, our executive coaches say, to coach. And you'd be like, well, why wouldn't that? Couldn't you just help somebody have a better lens on how they come across or show up? There are so many factors that go into that, that it is difficult. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't make some progress, but this trio is actually, I think, seeing this trust and respect and awareness factor, to me, is what takes this field note out of just being one of those, self-talk is important, and people just nod along like, yeah, this is a good reminder. Nothing wrong with reminders, but there's more to this field note than just that.
Right. So I think the first time I interacted with the ideas around this was in dealing with a child in particular who kept on repeating the same bad behavior when they were younger. And at the time when they first started demonstrating this behavior, it wasn't something that was age inappropriate, right? And so it's not inappropriate age-wise for a kid to steal at 5 years old. That's that's age appropriate. It is age appropriate when they are called out on it, they meet the consequences of it, and then they continue to do it, right? That's a weird.
That's a problem. Yeah, right.
So when that continues to happen over and over again, then you start to just, like, aside from the fact that you like to swipe stuff from your brothers and sisters, you're getting punished for it. And there's hardly ever a time that you get away from it. And so we started to try to figure out, like, other ways to be able to talk to them about it.
Sure.
Right. And so at first we would try to say, can you empathize with how it makes your brother sad when you take money from his wallet and he wasn't expecting it? And that didn't seem to make any impact. Like, so his empathy for other people wasn't there. And so my wife and I started to talk about, well, what about empathy for your future self?
Yeah, right.
Because you will get in trouble for this. And it was the first time.
And you won't be happy when that happens.
Right. Yeah. So future version of yourself will be really upset. And then it'll create a cycle where you end up hating yourself. And so don't do things where you end up hating yourself, right?
Yep.
2 weeks forward from now, you're really going to be disappointed in the choice that you made 2 weeks ago. But it was the first time that my wife and I had ever kind of like were forced to think outside the box. Empathy isn't working here. So what about empathy for yourself, right? It's an important
Did that start to get across?
No, it didn't.
It did. It was a good try, though.
It was a good try.
Yeah.
It was just an interesting thing.
Right.
So, but the notion of like, okay, if you're just going to be selfish about this, maybe we could turn this selfishness into something where you thinking about yourself should be something that actually orients you a little bit better.
Well, it actually is a foundational element of our civilization as human beings, which is the idea of sacrifice, the limiting of something that we're doing now or in the present, whether it's a limiting of behavior or an investment of behavior that's difficult into the idea of something in the future. This is something that, instinctually animals beavers might build a dam, but it's not because they sat down and started to kind of plot through what their retirement looked like and what their 401ks were. They weren't doing any sort of future envisioning of these things. Yet we can make that bargain with the future. And that's why there's kind of that, famous sort of scene from the Simpsons where Homer is downing vodka and drinking a jar of mayonnaise, and it's pointed out to him this might not be good for him, and his response is, that's a problem for future Homer.
Right, exactly.
Right. Yeah. No empathy for future Homer.
Yes. No, so if you can have a little bit of empathy for yourself, it really does help. So it brings to mind this idea of the viral video that has taken the world by storm this weekend of the Phillies fan down in Marlins who robbed the ball from the dad and then the kid and went over and berated them and ended up.
Yeah. You mean the Phillies fan who acted just like a Phillies fan acts?
Oh, careful with that. Yeah, but yes. So, okay. So let's just say if we give her the benefit of the doubt that she was drunk and that she wasn't really thinking things through, like the reason that you don't do things like that when you're in your right mind is because there's this mimetic value of saying, like, even if I don't have like the values that are like out there, if there's a self-protection around the idea of like, I don't want the fans who are seeing me rip this out from its glove to gang up on me, right? No one wants that. And by the way, that's exactly what happened up in the stands as well. Much less, the online mob that formed as well. And so you're wondering, where is the lack of self-awareness that doesn't help this lady out in that situation where she doesn't understand the optics of how that. So in her own little world, which really was like this 4-foot bubble, that a ball came into that bubble. So now the ball belongs to her.
And to nobody else.
Right. And to nobody else. And so if there's a scramble for that ball, maybe she doesn't understand the ethics that go into the way that it all happens. But to where along the line that a person like that doesn't stop themselves and say, this is not going to be a good decision for my future self.
Yeah, especially, it's not as though if you're a loyal baseball fan, which apparently she was, wearing the jersey and everything, and out there for the game, that you're like, oh, when a ball goes into the stands, let's see. Oh, every single time there's a camera on what's happening.
Yes.
That everyone in the world can see.
Right.
So you're at some level, that shouldn't be like an occasional thought about that. It should be like, oh, of course, that whatever's happening now is going to be seen, right? You should be aware of it. Now, I don't know, and I had followed this story as much as anybody. I don't know. I'd seen a particular. Did she actually say that she'd had too much to drink?
No. I'm trying to be as empathetic.
Oh, you
were
being empathetic. Yeah. That maybe that was, because again, I don't know that that's a get out of jail free card for any of us to be like, I lost that client deal because I'd had too much to drink. So see,
no, certainly not. And of course, when you have this lack of self-trust and self-respect and self-awareness, you do think to yourselves, well, what's a relatable excuse that I might use? So her PR agent might be saying she had a little too much to drink at the game. And then suddenly it's a relatable thing. It's like, okay, she still acted really badly. The online mob still wants to figure out where she works to get her fired. Right. But who knows what's going to come of it. But you would think in this climate, right, after what the CEO did with the hat at the
The
US
hat,
Open,
right? Exactly.
right?
So we're on a run of these, and I think it wasn't his first defense. Like, I'm competitive.
Yes.
That's how I got to be who I am.
Yes.
Like I'm going to go after it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if anybody in PR coached him on that answer or not, too. But it wasn't.
Yeah, probably not. Now, I think that these are actually not trivial sort of sideline things to what's at stake in this field note. So,
exactly.
Which is, how do you relate to people that matter to you and your friends and family? How do you relate to people in your workplace? Yes. How do you relate to people just as you move about in the world? Tends to be to some degree, if not the most important factor, how you see yourself. Yes. Like how you see, what's the internal dialogue that you're having in the world, whether you feel aggrieved, whether you feel beaten down, whether you feel like you're top of the world, whether you feel like you're full of a capacity for forgiveness and tolerance, even right. when you're in the right and maybe others just need a little bit of grace. All kinds of things would come into play with how and who you are, because these are the moments where some of those things are revealed.
Yes.
Now, I don't think any of us would want to realize that at a particular moment where we kind of let our guard down and display our worst behavior, that suddenly we're in the Truman Show and everybody can see it.
Yes.
But that is sort of the test. Now, the field note is then ultimately saying, if you're wanting to have positive impact relationships in the world, well, and if that's been a problem, right, if it's not going well, but even if you wanted it to go exceptionally well, how is that internal dialogue? Because it's not just a matter of happy talk, this self-talk of I can do it and everything's great and I love people, because that's just sort of platitudes. In fact, it's oftentimes looking at the dark side of that, the things that you're saying to yourself that are very much not helpful.
Yeah. And there is the dark side of not having the kind of self-respect that you have is mentioned that you'll often tolerate disrespect and mistreatment and rejection where you shouldn't. So as we think back to the psychology of the Phillies lady, right? Somewhere in her past, she might be like, I can't take any guff from anybody, right? And so even though it's a weird violation that someone came into her 4-foot radius and took the ball when she thought she deserved it, somewhere in her mind, maybe she's saying like, I cannot abide mistreatment of what I think of the rules of how this should work.
Right.
I'm going to be disrespected. And so maybe she overreacts to the idea that at some point she didn't have a lot of self-respect for herself. And now here's the public moment where she's going to stand up for herself and really make things right. And she's going to make her young self proud. Right.
Yeah.
So the balance of like her complete lack of self-awareness with her over-indexing on her idea of what self-respect is makes this like, okay, there's a couple levers here that the self-trust, self-respect, self-awareness aren't all on the self-continuum. Dialing back some of those sometimes, right? And you might have a weird attachment style and some trauma in your youth that makes you think you should stand up for yourself a lot more when you really shouldn't, right? And so that balance is something that at the end of the day, you probably do need someone else to be able to tell you where those dials should be.
For sure. Yeah. And it's simply not a matter of, as we indicated, just, saying, hey, everything's great. When actually, if there are studies that show that if you're actually kind of engaged in this sort of just self-affirmation, that actually is an exaggeration or it's a fictitious portrayal of some version of yourself that you think that maybe you'd like to be, but you really aren't.
Right.
That gap is actually defeats you every day. Right.
Yes.
So, and that's kind of actually a truth in organizations. We often say that, like, if the values and mission of an organization, they need to be based on things that are real, like in terms of like, well, what are the strengths that we have as an organization that are better than most of our competitors? And well, what are the strengths that you have as an individual or the thing that you're doing in the universe that are stronger, that the combination of those things, you need to build those affirmations probably on the things that are strengths and not weaknesses. Your weaknesses you can work on, but you really want to get exceptional on those strengths, because that's actually where you start to have that sort of reputation with yourself, which is where a lot of that idea around self-esteem has, where your character is is the reputation you have with yourself. I'm the person who does this. Like I know this. And I do think that my tie back to football, because I know we're like at about 15 seconds on our time clock. There was an article in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. I read the physical paper, so I can't remember which is which. But on Friday, the Friday edition for the weekend, there was an article about how, well, suits and ties, you don't see them everywhere. I tend to still like to wear suits and ties, despite not wearing a tie very often on Lead Better. But maybe it's from my past TV news anchor background. But the vestige now is Sunday NFL sports, where the announcers, and it's not because they're being mandated by the networks or anything. There is just an ethos that you come dressed, you come ready, you come with a tie. Sometimes you see the Monday night games or some of the other ones, and they're kind of dressed more. Sunday, they are in their Sunday best. And I was reading through, and you could read them what they're saying. They're like, I feel really good about myself. Like I feel like I'm bringing this, person, and they're used to putting on a uniform, many of them, to play football. Right. And now they're putting on a uniform that says, this is who I am. And so it becomes an external evidence of an internal attitude that they're trying to manifest. Well, we can do all of that. We can all do a better job of doing that and creating a sort of a self-respect, a self-awareness, a demonstration of who we are through making sure that internal language that we're having is supporting who we actually see ourselves being in the world.
Right. Stand up straight.
There you go.
I wear suits. Right. I wear suits now. There's so many of those things. That behavior counts. It really, really does.
Indeed. Thanks, Mikey.
Right. Thank you.